The rain poured heavily outside, painting soft streaks on the kitchen window. Emily stood by the sink, lost in thought, her reflection blurred by the water on the glass. She felt the stillness behind her, the kind that came after years of unspoken words. Her husband, Mark, sat in his favorite leather chair in the living room, silent as ever, watching her. It had become his habit lately. He didn't speak much anymore, didn't argue or comfort. He just watched. Their home had turned into a quiet battlefield. There were no loud fights, no broken things, just distance. The warmth that once filled the house had faded slowly, like a candle burning itself out. Emily tried to ignore it, to keep busy, to make the house feel alive. But nothing worked. Even the soft jazz she played in the evenings couldn't drown out the silence that grew between them that night. The power flickered as thunder rolled across the sky. Emily sighed, drying her hands on a towel, when a sudden knock echoed from the front door. It startled her. They rarely had visitors anymore. She looked at Mark, who didn't move from his chair. He simply lifted his eyes, calm and unreadable. "I'll get it," she said quietly, though he didn't reply. When she opened the door, a tall man stood under the porch light, rain dripping from his coat. "Emily." His voice carried warmth and surprise. She blinked, needing a second to recognize him. It was Noah, Mark's old college friend. She hadn't seen him in nearly 7 years. "Noah," she said softly, half smiling. "It's been a long time." He grinned, brushing water from his hair. "I hope I'm not intruding. Mark invited me over last week, but I couldn't confirm. I figured I'd take the chance." She hesitated, glancing back at her husband, who still sat motionless in his chair. "No, of course not," she said finally. "Come in, it's pouring out there." As Noah stepped inside, the room seemed to shift. His presence brought a spark of warmth the house hadn't felt in a long time. He looked around, smiling politely. "You've redecorated. This place feels quieter than I remember." Emily forced a smile. "Yeah, we've both been busy." Mark finally spoke, his tone flat but calm. "Good to see you, Noah. Been a while." They exchanged a short handshake, but Emily noticed the distance in it. Noah seemed to sense it too, though he tried to lighten the mood with stories from the past, old trips, pranks, shared dreams. He had a way of talking that filled empty rooms, and for a little while Emily found herself listening, even laughing. She'd forgotten what that felt like. They sat around the dinner table later, eating quietly. Noah's charm and easy humor pulled her in. "Emily, you used to sing, didn't you?" he asked suddenly, smiling. "At that lake house trip. You had everyone mesmerized." She chuckled shyly. "That was a lifetime ago." Mark's fork stopped midair. "Yeah," he muttered, barely glancing up. "It was—" The tension returned like a shadow. Noah looked between them, clearly sensing the strain, but tried to keep the moment light. "You should sing again," he said softly. "It suited you. Some people just have that light in them." Emily's chest tightened at his words. No one had said anything kind to her in so long. She nodded quietly and changed the subject, but the warmth of his tone lingered. After dinner, she made tea. Noah followed her to the kitchen, offering to help. Their conversation there was quieter, more personal. "You're okay, right?" he asked gently. "You seem different." Emily looked down at the steaming cup. "We all change, I guess." He nodded, his eyes kind but searching. "I just remember you being full of life. It's strange seeing you this quiet." Before she could reply, their hands brushed when she passed him the sugar bowl. The touch was brief, innocent, but it made her heart beat a little faster. Not because she felt something forbidden, but because she realized how long it had been since anyone had truly seen her. When they returned to the living room, Mark was still in his chair, unmoved, his gaze steady. Emily placed his cup of tea beside him. "Here," she said softly. "Thanks," he murmured. His eyes met Noah's, calm but piercing. "Stay a while," he said, his tone almost deliberate. "It's been years since we talked." Noah hesitated. "If you're sure?" Mark leaned back, folding his hands. "I'm sure. Go on, talk. I'll just sit here." The words carried a strange weight. Emily exchanged a quick glance with Noah, confused. Still, they spoke about old times, college memories, people they hadn't seen in years. Noah's voice filled the room, warm and familiar. Emily found herself drawn in by the simplicity of it, all the laughter, the nostalgia. For a moment, she forgot the years of silence that had defined her marriage. Mark stayed quiet, sipping his tea, watching. He didn't interrupt, didn't smile, didn't frown. He just watched them like a man witnessing something he already understood. The sight of his stillness made Emily uneasy. She felt like he was waiting for something, or maybe letting something happen. As the night deepened, Noah stood to leave. "It was good to see you both," he said, his voice sincere. "I've missed this." The old times. Emily walked him to the door. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. He looked at her for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. "You deserve to be happy, Emily," he said quietly. "Whatever that means for you." The words caught her off guard. She wanted to respond. But he smiled faintly and walked away into the night before she could find the right words. When she closed the door, the room felt different, too quiet, too charged. Mark was still in his chair, eyes fixed on her. The lamplight flickered, casting long shadows across the floor. "You haven't smiled like that in a long time," he said finally, voice calm but heavy. Her breath caught. "Mark, it's not." He raised a hand gently, stopping her. "You don't need to explain," he said softly. "I saw it all." There was no anger in his tone, just sadness, a kind of weary acceptance that broke something inside her. She sank into the couch across from him, her hands trembling slightly. "What did you see?" she whispered. He stared into his cup. "I saw you remember what joy feels like, and I saw that I haven't given it to you in a long time." Her throat tightened. For years she had begged for him to talk, to show emotion, and now that he was, she had no idea how to respond. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Inside, they sat in silence. Two people who had once loved each other deeply, but no longer knew how to bridge the space between them. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the way Mark had looked at her like a man who had already said goodbye without words. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But one thing was clear, the quiet life she had built was starting to crack. And she could no longer pretend not to notice. And downstairs, in that same leather chair, Mark sat awake, too, just watching the rain. The next morning arrived gray and silent. The kind of morning where the house felt colder than usual. Emily woke to the sound of the wind brushing against the windows. Mark was already downstairs. She could hear the faint creak of his chair. He was always awake early these days, sitting in that same spot, staring at nothing. When she came down, he didn't look at her right away. "You didn't sleep," he said quietly, his eyes still on the rain-streaked window. "Neither did you," she replied, pouring herself some coffee. The air between them felt heavier than it had the night before. The memory of Noah's visit lingered like an echo, his laughter, his words, the way Mark had watched everything unfold without saying much. Mark finally turned to her. "He's changed," he said softly. She nodded. "He has. Life does that." He hesitated, then added, "So have you." Emily didn't know how to answer. She wanted to tell him that yes, she had changed, that years of silence had made her smaller, quieter, that she had learned to keep her heart safe because she didn't know if he wanted it anymore. But instead, she just said, "Maybe we both did." Mark didn't argue. He only sighed, leaning back in the chair that had become almost a symbol of his stillness. Later that day, she went outside to water the small garden she'd started by the fence. The clouds had cleared a bit and sunlight shimmered on the wet leaves. As she was working, she heard a car door close. She turned on. There was Noah again, holding a paper bag and wearing that same gentle smile. "I was driving through and thought I'd drop this off," he said, holding up the bag. "Some pastries from that bakery you loved downtown." Emily smiled despite herself. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he replied. "It's good to see you smile again." Mark was standing by the window, watching. He didn't move, didn't interrupt. Emily felt his gaze, but didn't let it stop her. Noah's presence brought something she hadn't felt in a long time: ease. They talked by the garden for a few minutes. The conversation was simple, about work, about how small-town life could feel both peaceful and lonely. Noah spoke about traveling for his job, meeting new people, and how he sometimes missed the stability of home. Emily laughed softly. "Careful, you'll make me jealous," he grinned. "Maybe I'm just realizing I've been running from things that matter." There was something in his voice that made her heart stir, a quiet honesty that she hadn't heard in years. Before she could reply, Mark stepped outside. "I see we're having guests again," he said, voice calm but unreadable. Noah straightened, his friendly tone steady. "Hope you don't mind. I was just dropping something off." Mark nodded slowly. "Not at all. Emily loves company." Something about the way he said it made Emily uncomfortable, though he didn't sound angry. It was almost as if he was letting it happen, watching a story unfold without trying to change it. Noah excused himself soon after. As he walked back to his car, Mark turned to Emily. "He cares about you," he said quietly. She froze. "Mark," he shook his head. "You don't have to deny it. I can see it." Emily looked down, gripping the watering can tighter. "He's just a friend." Mark studied her face. "Maybe, but he looks at you like I used to." The words stung more than she expected. She wanted to tell him that she didn't want Noah, that she just wanted to feel alive again. But Mark's expression wasn't accusing. It was sorrowful, almost tender. That night, the tension lingered. Emily cooked dinner, but they barely spoke. She could feel his eyes on her from across the table, not angry, but distant in a way that made her heart ache. When she sat down, he finally said, "Do you ever wonder when it changed?" She hesitated. "When we changed?" He nodded. She looked down at her plate. "Maybe it was so slow we didn't notice." Mark took a deep breath. "I noticed. I just didn't know how to fix it." His voice cracked slightly, and for the first time in years, Emily saw the man she had fallen in love with, the one who used to make her laugh, who used to talk about dreams, who used to hold her hand during thunderstorms. "I thought if I just stayed calm, didn't argue, we'd be fine," he continued. "But silence isn't peace, is it?" Her eyes filled with tears. "No, it's not." The sound of the rain started again outside, soft and steady. Mark leaned back in his chair, eyes glistening. "You know, when Noah came last night, I realized something." She whispered, "That you were happy. For the first time in a long time." Emily tried to speak, but words failed her. He looked at her gently. "And I didn't feel angry. I just felt sorry for letting it get this far." The confession hit her harder than she expected. She stood up, wiping at her eyes. "Mark, I never wanted to hurt you." "I know," he said. "But sometimes love fades quietly. Like background music you stop hearing." They both sat there in silence, letting the truth hang in the air. The next few days passed in uneasy calm. Mark went about his routine, reading, working, sitting in his chair. Emily found herself cleaning more than usual, as if movement could quiet her thoughts. She kept replaying his words, the way he had looked at her not as a husband, jealous or betrayed, but as someone saying goodbye without saying it aloud. On the third day, Noah called. "I just wanted to check on you," he said. "You seemed weighed down." She hesitated. "It's been a hard week. Can I stop by?" "Just to talk." Emily agreed before thinking it through. When he arrived, Mark was home again. Sitting in his chair, Noah greeted him politely, but Mark didn't stand. "Go ahead," Mark said softly. "I'll be right here." It was strange, unsettling even. Mark wasn't cold, he seemed peaceful, like a man who had already accepted something. Emily and Noah sat across from him, talking quietly about life, regrets, and second chances. Noah's tone was gentle. "Sometimes we stay quiet because we think it's kindness. But silence can hurt more than words." Emily nodded, eyes glistening. "You sound like you've lived that." "I have," he admitted. And I learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth about what you feel." She looked at him, and in that moment, her heart broke not from desire, but from clarity. She realized how much she had missed connection, not romance necessarily, but being seen. When Noah left, Mark spoke quietly from his chair. "You're going to have to choose, Emily." Her heart pounded. Choose. Between staying in what's safe, he said, or finding what's real. Tears filled her eyes. "And what do you want?" He smiled sadly. "I want you to be happy, even if that means it's not with me." Emily's breath caught. For the first time in years, she saw love in his eyes, again quiet, selfless, and heartbreaking. That night, she sat beside him, neither speaking. The storm outside grew louder, but the silence between them felt softer now, almost forgiving. She reached out and took his hand. He didn't pull away. They didn't know what the future held, but something had changed. The walls between them had cracked just enough for the truth to shine through. The next morning, Emily woke up earlier than usual. The rain had stopped and sunlight filtered through the curtains, soft and golden. The world outside looked calm, but her heart wasn't. She glanced at the empty space beside her in bed. Mark had already gone downstairs. She could hear the faint clinking of a coffee cup. For a moment, she just sat there, staring at the quiet room that had seen more silence than laughter lately. When she walked into the kitchen, Mark was sitting in his usual spot, the same old chair near the window. He wasn't reading or looking at his phone. He was just thinking. Emily poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. Neither of them spoke for a while. Finally, Mark said softly, "You're meeting him again, aren't you?" Emily froze. "What do you mean?" "Noah," he said, looking out the window. "You didn't say anything, but I could tell. He called yesterday when you were in the garden." She set her cup down gently. "He just wants to talk, Mark." "That's all?" Mark nodded slowly, his eyes still far away. "You don't have to explain. I'm not angry." But Emily wished he was angry. It would have been easier to handle than this quiet acceptance. She sighed and said, "Mark, I don't even know what this is. I just feel lost." He turned toward her finally, his voice soft. "I know. I felt it too. Maybe for longer than you realize." His honesty caught her off guard. She wanted to cry, but she didn't. Instead, she said, "I'll go see him today. Not to make decisions, but to clear my head." He didn't stop her. He just nodded once and went back to his chair. That quiet nod hurt more than words ever could. By afternoon, Emily found herself standing in front of a small cafe downtown. Noah was already there, sitting by the window, a notebook open beside his coffee. He looked up when she entered, and that warm smile of his made something in her chest loosen. "Hey," he said softly. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," she admitted, sitting across from him. "Everything's messy." He studied her face for a moment. "Marriage can be like that. It breaks and bends before you even realize it's happening." She nodded slowly. "He's not a bad man, Noah, just distant. And maybe I stopped trying too." Noah leaned forward, his tone gentle but firm. "You don't owe me or anyone an explanation. But you owe yourself honesty. What do you really want, Emily?" The question lingered. She didn't know. She'd built her life around being steady, kind, dependable, but somewhere along the way, she'd forgotten how to be happy. They talked for nearly an hour. Mostly about life, about choices, about how easy it was to lose yourself in routine. Noah didn't flirt, didn't cross any line. He just listened. Really listened in a way Mark hadn't in years. When she finally stood to leave, he said softly, "I hope you find your way back to him or to yourself. Either way, you deserve that." His kindness touched her. She smiled faintly and walked out, her heart full of both comfort and confusion. When Emily returned home, the sky had darkened again. Mark was still in his chair, staring at the fading light. For a long moment, she just stood there, watching him. He looked so tired, so human, so broken. "I met him," she said quietly. He nodded without surprise. "And he told me to be honest with myself." Mark turned toward her, his eyes soft. Were you? She hesitated. I'm trying. He nodded again, then said something that caught her off guard. Do you know why I sit here every evening, Emily? She shook her head. Because this chair faces the world, he said. When I stop moving, I start thinking. And I've realized that watching isn't living. I've been watching my life instead of living it with you. Tears stung her eyes. Mark, he smiled sadly. I used to love the way you laughed when you cooked, or how you'd hum while folding laundry. But I let that fade because I thought quiet meant peace. I was wrong. Emily sat down beside him, her voice trembling. You didn't lose me, Mark. We lost us. They sat in silence again, but this time it felt different, softer. Fragile but alive. Later that night, after dinner, Mark surprised her. Let's go for a drive, he said. She blinked. Now, yeah, he said, grabbing his coat. I want to remember what it's like to do something together. They drove down the empty road outside town, passing glowing streetlights and quiet houses. The radio played an old song they used to love. Emily looked out the window, feeling something in her chest untangle. After a while, Mark spoke quietly. When you smiled earlier today before you saw me, watching, I realized I missed that version of you. The one who glowed without trying. She smiled faintly. You can't go back, Mark. No, he said. But maybe we can start over. The simplicity of his words filled her with hope and fear at once. Could love that faded really return? They stopped by the small lake on the edge of town. The moon shimmered on the surface. They stood there side by side without saying anything. Then Mark said softly, You know, when Noah was here, I wasn't jealous. Emily looked at him in surprise. You weren't. He shook his head. I was scared. Scared that he reminded you of something I'd made you forget, how it feels to be wanted, to be seen. Her eyes glistened. You didn't make me forget, Mark. We just stopped reminding each other. He reached for her hand, hesitant at first, then firm. Then maybe we can start reminding each other again. The warmth of his hand brought tears to her eyes. I'd like that. When they returned home, Mark didn't go straight to his chair. He walked to the kitchen, poured them both some tea, and said, I'll put this chair away tomorrow. Emily blinked. Why? He smiled. Because it's been a wall between us. And I think it's time to stop watching and start living. She felt her heart swell with emotion. For the first time in years, she believed him. That night, they talked until the early hours of the morning about their dreams, their fears, the years they'd lost to silence. It wasn't perfect. There were still wounds, still doubts, but something had shifted as Emily lay in bed later. She thought about Noah. She realized his purpose wasn't to take her away from her marriage. It was to remind her what connection felt like. And in doing so, he had unknowingly brought her and Mark closer, before she drifted to sleep. Mark whispered, Thank you for not giving up on us. Emily smiled in the dark. We're both guilty of that. But maybe that's what makes it worth fixing. Downstairs, the chair sat empty by the window for the first time in years. Outside, the rain began again, gentle and steady, like a promise being rewritten. The house wasn't silent anymore, it was healing. The morning after their long talk, Emily woke up to the smell of breakfast. The kitchen light glowed warm, and for the first time in months, she heard the soft hum of music. Mark stood by the stove, wearing his old gray t-shirt and a calm smile. It felt like something small but important had returned. She leaned against the doorway, watching him quietly. He looked up and said, You're staring. She smiled. I'm remembering. He chuckled softly. That's a good start. They sat together, eating in comfortable silence. No heavy words, no tension, just two people slowly finding their rhythm again. Emily noticed how Mark looked at her now, really looked like he wanted to memorize every detail. It made her heart ache in the best way. After breakfast, he surprised her again. Let's fix the garden today, he said. She blinked. The one we stopped caring about? He nodded. It used to be your favorite place. Let's bring it back. So they did. The sun rose higher as they worked side by side, pulling weeds, trimming bushes, laughing when the water hose sprayed them both. Their hands got dirty, but something inside them felt clean again. Emily hadn't realized how much she'd missed this doing simple things together. Without pressure or distance, by noon, they were exhausted but happy. Mark sat down on the steps, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You know," he said, "I almost sold this house last month." Emily's eyes widened. "What? Why?" "I thought you wanted to leave," he admitted. "You were so distant. I thought maybe letting go would hurt less than fighting for something already broken." She felt her throat tighten. "Mark, I didn't want to leave. I just didn't know how to stay." He reached for her hand. "Then we'll learn together." It wasn't a perfect fix, but it was Reland that mattered more. A week passed, then two. The days grew brighter. Emily started painting again, something she hadn't done since before their marriage got quiet. Mark found her one afternoon sitting in front of the easel, covered in color, lost in thought. "What are you painting?" he asked, stepping closer. She smiled faintly. "Us. But not how we were, how we're trying to be." He looked at the canvas. It wasn't finished, but the strokes were soft, hopeful. "It's beautiful," he whispered. She looked at him, her eyes glistening. "So are we when we remember why we began?" Later that evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Mark said something unexpected. "I wrote a letter." Emily turned to him. "A letter." He nodded. "To you. I wrote it months ago, but I never gave it." He handed her an envelope. The paper was slightly crumpled, as if it had been folded and unfolded many times. She opened it with trembling hands. His handwriting filled the page, messy but full of heart. It said, "Emily. If you're reading this, it means I was too scared to say these words out loud. I know I've been distant. I know I've watched instead of acted. You deserved more. You always did. But even when you turned away, I never stopped loving you. I just forgot how to show it. If you ever find this, please, no matter what happens, you were always my reason." When she looked up, her eyes were wet. "Why didn't you give this to me?" Mark sighed. "Because I thought it was too late." "But it's not, is it?" She shook her head and hugged him tightly. "No, it's not." That night, for the first time in years, they fell asleep holding each other, their hearts quiet but full. A few days later, Emily received a message from Noah. Just one line. "I'm moving to another city. Take care of yourself." She stared at the screen for a while before replying. "Thank you for helping me see what I already had." Then she put the phone away and didn't look back. Months passed. The house changed slowly, new paint on the walls, laughter echoing through the halls, the smell of fresh flowers by the window. Mark kept his promise. The chair by the window was gone. In its place stood a small bookshelf filled with Emily's paintings and their favorite books. One Sunday afternoon, they hosted a small dinner for friends. The house was full of warmth, stories, and music. When everyone left, Mark turned to Emily and said, "You know, I used to think peace was silence. But it's this noise, laughter, life." She smiled. "You finally learned to live, not just watch." He grinned. "Guess I had a good teacher." They sat together, sipping tea, watching the night settle outside. The rain began again, soft and steady, but this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt like renewal. Emily looked at Mark and said quietly, "Do you ever think about how close we came to losing everything?" He nodded. "All the time. But maybe we had to fall apart to see how much we still wanted to hold on." Her eyes softened. "I think love is like that, messy, hard, but worth the work." He reached for her hand, his thumb tracing slow circles over her skin. "Then let's keep working." The days that followed weren't perfect. They still argued, sometimes over small things. But they talked through it, learned to listen, to forgive. Every evening they made a small ritual tea, soft music, sitting together on the couch. No chair, no distance, just presence. One evening, Emily brought out her finished painting. She'd titled it "The Chair That Watched Love Return." It showed two figures standing in sunlight. With an empty chair in the corner, symbol of everything they had survived, Mark looked at it, his voice full of emotion. "That's us," she nodded. "It's our story." We sat, we watched, and then we finally moved. Pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "Promise me we'll never go back to watching." She smiled. "Promise." Years later, when people asked how they managed to rebuild their marriage, Emily always said, "We stopped waiting for love to come back. We went and found it ourselves." Their home became a place of laughter again. The garden bloomed, the walls were filled with pictures, and the silence that once haunted their nights was replaced by the steady rhythm of shared life. And sometimes, when the rain fell, Mark would glance toward the spot where the old chair once stood and whisper, almost to himself, "Thank you for leaving." Emily would smile, place her hand on his, and say, "Thank you for staying." 'Cause in the end, that was their real story, not one of heartbreak, but of two people who dared to begin again when it would have been easier to give up. The chair was gone, but its lesson remained. Love isn't about watching, it's about showing up. Every day, even when it's hard. And in that quiet house, under the sound of the rain, Emily and Mark finally lived the life they had once only watched from afar.